Welcome to Nightlight. Step away from the mainstream and gather around as we enlighten the world and our realities and travel this cosmic journey we call life. Join us as we share with you and provide that beacon that can guide us all to a better way. Explore with us as we examine a metaphysical montage of spiritual insights, covering everything from the mundane to the magical, UFOs to unicorns, and everything in between. This is a time of awakening, of sharing and evolving, of spreading our wings and soaring on the cosmic breath of creation. Come and join with other light-minded spirits as we weave our lights together to seek understanding, enlightenment, and, with a little luck, some wisdom. This is Nightlight, a reminder that you are never alone.
Welcome to Nightlight, everybody. Thanks for spending your time with us. I want to thank Ken Quiethawk for that amazing intro. He and his wife have provided magic for generations and will continue to do so. And if you haven't heard his CDs, I urge you to go look for them because they are phenomenal and magical at the same time. Really excited because I've got a good guest tonight, and I'm really chomping at the bit, so to speak. Jim Willis joins us tonight to share one of his books, The Quantum Akashic Field, a guide to out-of-body experiences for Astral Travelers, with us. He is a first-hand explorer of how to consciously step out of your body and navigate the Quantum Akashic Field. He details a step-by-step process of engaging extrasensory out-of-body travel and examines the quantum landscape of the Akashic Field, meetings with spirit guides, and descriptions of out-of-body experiences from his personal journal and from world spiritual traditions, including the Bible and many other spiritual texts. He explores current theories about the science of consciousness and sensory perception, including discoveries from quantum physics, and how these discoveries align with the traditional wisdom of shamans, dowsers, and mystics. He details a step-by-step process centered on safe, simple, meditative techniques and shows how to bypass the filters of your five senses while still fully awake and aware and engage in extrasensory out-of-body travel. Sharing his journey to connect with universal consciousness and navigate the quantum landscape of the Akashic Field, he reveals how conscious OBEs allow you to penetrate beyond normal waking perception into the realm of quantum perception. Jim is an author of 11 books on religion and spirituality in the 21st century, including Supernatural Gods, along with many magazine articles on topics ranging from earth energies to ancient civilizations. He's been an ordained minister for over 40 years while working part-time as a carpenter, musician, radio host, arts counselor, director, and adjunct college professor in the fields of world religions and instrumental music. And in his spare time, but wait, I don't think he has any, but we'll ask him. Welcome to the show, Jim. What do you do in your spare time?
Thank you, Barbara. You make me sound so interesting. Thank you for that wonderful introduction. In my spare time, I just love to write. I love to read. I love to study, and that's pretty much my life right now.
Well, I think that it's interesting in the journey that you have taken to get to this point in time, and I love talking to people who have been on that spiritual journey because everybody's different and everybody is striving to get to basically the same place in consciousness, and it's phenomenal to see. I think it's important for a lot of people to understand that in order to get to that level of consciousness, you really have to have a balanced life, and yours is certainly balanced, maybe overbalanced. But you have to continue to add material into what you're working with so that your perception of reality is expanded.
And it never stops either. I'm very fortunate in that at a time when most people are just kind of retired, and many people my age are playing golf and that kind of thing, I have so many interesting things to look forward to. I got a email from Andrew Collins, another great British researcher and author, a couple of months ago, who asked me to lead a tour to ancient sites in Turkey in September. And so now, at a time when it would just be very easy to sit home and watch TV and all that kind of thing, I'm having so much fun looking and looking forward to going to these places that I've been writing about, some of these ancient civilizations, starting in Istanbul and Göbekli Tepe, and sharing with folks who want to see these ancient sites that are so rich in spirituality. That kind of thing just keeps you going.
Yeah, Andrew's been on the show. He's really, he's a fascinating man. And are you going to be able to see Derinkuyu too? Derinkuyu? Yeah, it's.
Oh yes, yeah. We're going to Derinkuyu, and we're going to ancient Anatolia and Cappadocia. Andrew had a bit of a problem in that back in 98, he wrote a book called From the Ashes of Angels, and he dedicated it to the Kurdish people. And with the political situation the way it is over there, on his last trip over to Turkey, he found himself banned from the country. But he had this tour planned in September. So he emailed me and asked if I might stand in for him. So I'm really looking forward to it. As a matter of fact, if any of your listeners are interested in going or reading about it, if they can go to either my Facebook page, or they can go to Ancient Origins, who is sponsoring the tour, along with a group called Travel the Unknown. And even with all of the political unrest and everything over there, we've been assured that it's going to be perfectly safe, very well appointed, interesting group of people, and I'll have a chance to talk during the time as well, not only talking about the sites where we are, but giving a presentation on, one on dowsing and one on world religions, and probably some out-of-body stuff too as well. So it's going to be quite a trip. It's 12 days in September. I'm looking forward to it. I really am.
I know that Göbekli Tepe has always been a fascination of mine, and I've recently done a couple of interviews on it. Yeah. And Derinkuyu has also been another site that could house thousands and thousands of people, and it's just an amazing site. People should look it up, Google it for want of something else to do, because it is. You take a look at it and you think. We keep thinking of ancient people as being primitive, and they weren't. They were us with less
anything but
stuff. And I often have. Go ahead.
Oh no, I was going to say, I think as a matter of fact, in many ways, they were way in front of us. They knew things that we have forgotten, and they may not have had our physical technology. But I think they had a technology, a psychic, I call it a psychic toolkit, that we have simply forgotten. It's there and we can access it. It's available to us, but our culture has just taken us away. It's put us so far into our left brains, that we just have forgotten what they once took for granted.
Well, I think we're at the fringes of. I would call it a spiritual revolution, because people are beginning to understand that while traditional religion is a wonderful foundation, it is in my opinion, and I have to preface this at the beginning of the show saying that when I give my opinion, it's just for me, and my opinion changes daily. So, I do not carve much in stone these days, but in my opinion, people are falling away from traditional organized religion into a more spiritual, cosmic spirituality. And
yes, I fully agree.
And so, it's sort of like we're coming to a time where we understand that the religions of this world for this realm apply to the earth plane, but the spirit is able to soar into other realms, into other dimensions, into other into other galaxies as far as that goes. And what is common knowledge here is just they don't even know what you're talking about in other places and other times. So it's a long time ago. The reason I did my website was because my philosophies, you can see in my website how I change my opinion all over the place. But I once said, somebody said I should be doing this full time, and I said, well, when I arrive where I'm going, I'll turn around. If there's anybody there, I'll talk to him. And he jumped on me and said, you don't understand. It's not arriving that anybody cares about. It's the journey, and that's your teaching tool.
Yeah.
So that's why the website is where it is.
Yeah, absolutely. We can talk about changing our opinions, but I just prefer to call it growth. We grow and we understand more, and so of course our ideas are going to grow along with us. I think it's a wonderful thing, and if for having had taught world religions in the college age and in the university, I'm struck over and over again how at the very beginning of so many of the religions that we understand in the world today, Judaism, Christianity, Islam, Hinduism, Buddhism, we talk about these. We go back to the beginning, and we find an essential shamanic experience that was practiced by the founders. It was an experience that any ancient shaman for thousands and thousands of years will be able to understand. It usually involved an out-of-body experience or meeting entities from another dimension. Moses went up on the mountaintop and talked to God. The Bible says face to face. Jesus went out into the desert and had an emotional experience out there with an entity from another dimension. And later on, he would take Peter and James and John, three of his disciples, up on the Mount of Transfiguration. And right out of the ether stepped Moses and Elijah to talk to him about what was coming. Muhammad talked about his famous night journey when he went to the 7 stages of heaven. And we can find the same thing. Buddha, before he could give the great Deer Park discourse that began his ministry, had to have his own battle with the devil figure of Buddhism, Amara. And we find it in Hinduism all the time. I think the problem is that after these essential shamanic experiences that so moved these people that they began a whole new way of understanding life, after that initial experience, along came the followers and then the followers of the followers, and pretty soon we were building rules and doctrines and dogmas that just crusted over the initial shamanic experience. And I sometimes wonder if the founders were to come back today, whether they would even recognize the religions that we have built in their name.
Well, probably not. I mean, the very, very earliest cosmology was almost a cosmic one. I mean, they didn't have a religion.
Yes.
They didn't worship anybody but the spirit of nature and the stars. I mean, it was amazing. And I think in my mind, we are coming back probably to something very similar to that, because people are beginning to understand that. Me too. It's just, you get to the point where you set a goal, and I have stopped setting goals, but I used to set a goal, and when I arrived at the conclusion of a goal, I would, sit back and say, now I've learned it all, and only to find that when you finish a goal, when you finish a journey, it just means you turn around and start another one. So the trick is to not really get there, because once you actually get there, you have to start over from square one. So, as you get to arriving at where you're going.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
There's a wonderful song that Mark Lowry wrote and sings. He was a member of the Bill Gaither vocal band, which is a Christian, evangelical gospel group. But even still, it was so nice to see Mark Lowry up on stage, and he was singing this wonderful song. He said, "I've seen a lot of crazy things done in your name. I've seen the tricks behind the magic show." And it just really reveals what religion can be so much today, especially when you go into some of these great, big, huge churches and see all of the technology that's there. And it's really quite a show. It can be very emotional. But that spiritual journey that was so prevalent in our ancestors somehow is just replaced with a kind of a technological magic show nowadays. And I'm really hoping that we are getting back to something that's real and something that is more cosmically connected, because that's where the essential reality is, I'm sure.
Oh, absolutely. And I do believe we are. I know. I've been in the field for, I think we're probably about the same age. I'm 75, so
I'm 74, so
okay. So yes, I thought so. So it's kind of like in my journey, this spiritual journey. It started out very simple, and then the more I learned, the more I realized I didn't know anything. And so now, especially with the radio show, I'm able to go into all sorts of different areas and of course, read the books that people have written in order to be able to talk intelligently with them. And I'm beginning to see that I mean, there are some areas that I really need to delve into because they're calling to me. And I think anybody who's on this kind of a journey, the further you get into it, the more you are attuned to and feel when something calls to you. You just have to go and learn more about it, so that it's a higher education in many different ways.
Yeah, and I found too that there's something else interesting going on nowadays, because way back in the time of Galileo, the church and science split, and over the years they developed a kind of a treaty between the two, and they said that science is going to be concerned with reality and what's going on in the world, and religion is supposed to be concerned with morality and ethics and that kind of thing. And so the two have been going down a parallel road, but I find it very strange, especially when we start seeing quantum reality now and understanding a little more about the quantum world, even though it's so counterintuitive. I use the word understanding quantum physics with a grain of salt. But even so, I think science is now beginning to explore the material realities of what the mystics and the dowsers and the gurus and shamans have been studying for thousands and thousands of years. So in effect, especially in the last 100 years with the quantum reality coming to the fore, I think what we're finding is the two roads, science and religion, are now beginning to merge in our generation, in our time. And scientists are beginning to describe things that the ancient Hindu rishis, for instance, were talking about 6,000 years ago. The Zen Buddhist has been saying for centuries and centuries, all is one. Everything is connected. And now with the whole quantum idea of entanglement, we're discovering that that's true in a physical sense as well as a spiritual sense. So I think what we're beginning to understand right now is the science of spirituality.
Well, I mean, they can't really ignore it when you have doctors and scientists having these out-of-body experiences and near-death experiences, and being dead and then coming back. So they have to acknowledge the fact that there is there is another reality beyond. Of course, they don't want to be absolute because that would, they have to publish or perish, and they have to stay, right along the line there. But people are getting more and more accepting of it, and you see it even in the movies that are out there, because I have often believed that television and radio and the movies have been a way to prepare the public for the new directions that the consciousness is going. And when you see a lot of this stuff going on in the movies, you step back and say, well, it's about time. We'll accept it as entertainment, and then when it becomes reality, it's not such a shock to our body. But I believe that most people, our DNA holds memories of lifetimes past. Our spirit is aware of everything that we've been through and done. So, I sometimes visualize the spirit sitting back in a lazy boy and putting its feet up and saying, wake me when you get to, understanding I'm real.
It's fascinating when you talk about our DNA carrying these things. When my wife Barbara and I came to the woods here, we left ministry 10 years ago. I retired, and when we came out here, we came with an agenda. We decided that we wanted to really explore with spirituality, and we wanted to get away from all the noise and all the confusion. Socrates once said, "Beware the barrenness of a busy life," and our life was so busy. And when we came out here, we deliberately wanted to slow down. And when you said DNA, it just couldn't help remind me of a story. I came out here with a Bible verse in mind. And the Bible verse was from the book of Genesis, believe it or not. Jacob and Esau, the story goes, had been separated after their estrangement, and Jacob had gone off and married the women who were going to become the mothers of the 12 tribes of Israel. He was coming back to be reconciled with his brother Esau, and on the night before their fateful meeting, he was, of course, nervous and worried, and he was pacing up and down, and the Bible says all of a sudden he met a man by the river, and he wrestled with him, and it turned out to be God, a theophany of God. And so the story says that Jacob wrestled with God and said, "I will not let you go until you bless me." And as he wrestled all night, that was the metaphor that I was taking when I came back here to the woods. I said, just like Jacob of old, God, it's you and me, no holds barred, no religion, no doctrine, no dogma. I want to experience, I want to wrestle with God. And so I came out here with the words on my mouth, "I will not let you go until you bless me." Well, about 3 years ago, I think it was, maybe 4, I was asked to go to Cornwall over in the UK and give a speech to a group there called the Parallel Community, wonderful group of people, and they invited me to come over and talk about world religions. And so I flew to the UK and spent some time dowsing among the ancient sites of southern England, and on Cornwall, and I just loved it, had a great time with the people. But I couldn't come out of England until I made a pilgrimage of my own. And my last stop was to rent a car, learn how to drive on the wrong side of the road, and drive up to this little town called Fenny Compton, which is up northwest of London. And the reason I wanted to go up there was because that's where my ancestors came from, and they were clergy in the Church of England. And the little church where they used to preach, my great-great-great-great-great-grandfather, I don't know how far it goes, used to stand up in the pulpit of this little church in Fenny Compton and preach. So I contacted a local historian and had a chance to go up there, and she let me into the church, and we talked. And she showed me the plaque on the wall where it said Willis, the name of my ancestor. And I stood up in the pulpit, and when I was in that pulpit, I was looking at the stained glass windows in the church, which were the same ones that were there when he was there. And lo and behold, the stained glass window that he looked at every single morning when he preached there showed Jacob wrestling with God, saying, "I will not let you go until you bless me." And somehow the DNA of my spiritual ancestor, how many generations ago, I don't even know, was somehow passed down to the point where I had to go on my own spiritual journey here, and that stained glass window that he looked at every Sunday morning pictured the very same verse that was on my mind when I came out here to the woods. I will not let you go until you bless me. I think it's passed down, that spiritual DNA that you were talking about. It's so real and so vivid.
Yeah. Well, and it's really it's sort of when it wakes up in you, and it's different for everybody. I want to keep emphasizing that as we go further and further into tonight, because everybody is very unique. The way they perceive life, the way they perceive their spiritual journey, it's all unique. So that while we may share what we experienced, that isn't that isn't the cut and dried way to do anything. It's how we did it, and it's sort of like I keep talking to people and telling them they have to go within. They have to find their own roadmap. They have to understand the connection with the spirit that is riding in this physical body that we're walking around in this lifetime. And it will be different for everyone. Often I have told people you create your reality by your perception of it, and that's also true. It's sort of we need to understand that we are in control, and while there is a creator that certainly gave us the spark of life, he also gave us free will. So it's kind of like you've got eternity here. So if you want to sit back, take a lifetime off and not do anything, that's okay. The lessons await, but it's more fun to play with the lessons. One of the things that when reading your book, which I thoroughly enjoyed, the book is really it's an easy read, and everybody is going to say, oh, I remember hearing that, or I remember seeing that, or it's a reminder. You take it down really to the bare bones, which is a great thing to do for everybody. But the one thing that I'm sure that a lot of people are going to be curious about, you talk about the Quantum Akashic Field, a guide to out-of-body experiences for the Astral Traveler. Now, a lot of people that have listened to the show and everything, they're familiar with the Akashic Records and the Hall of the Akashic Records. And the Akashic Field is different, or is it?
I think in some ways different, in many ways the exact same thing. The word Akasha is an ancient Sanskrit word, and it's been brought back into use through Irvin Laszlo. It's been made popular especially, who was talking about a field, a quantum reality field that he calls Akasha. And it's that field of, the field of potential. Laszlo says he calls it information, in the sense that it is being informed and molded. It is the field out of which everything, every potential, every possibility arises. And that possibility, which is in total energetic form, that possibility comes out of the field of Akasha, eventually through the newly discovered Higgs field, where energy takes on mass and begins to manifest itself here in this particular realm, this particular perception realm that we live in. And then everything that we do, everything that we think, everything that we experience is recorded forever. I mean, that's the purpose of our life. This is a big school for us. At least that's how I like to think of it. And we are here to experience reality in all of its form. And so everything we do and say and even think returns back to that Akashic field and becomes a part of the Akashic record. So I would like to think of it, at least, as we come from Akasha, and the experience that we have is recorded forever in the Akashic record. The Bible talks about it in a different terminology. It uses the word the book of life. Everything we do is recorded in the book of life. I think they were talking about the same thing. It's recorded in the sense that the whole purpose of this existence is to go through what we're going through, to experience what we're experiencing, so that we can understand the concept of individuality. When you stop to think about it, in the source, there is no individuality. How can there be? Everything is one, essentially one. And yet, if we are not individuals, we cannot have the different kinds of experiences we need. So I think at some point, we make a very courageous decision. I think everybody who's ever born is here because we have made a courageous decision to leave the comfort and the security of the one in the source and take on individuality, take on these experiences, both the good and the bad, the positive and the negative, so that these experiences may be recorded forever. And everything that we do. So we're on a great missionary journey. We're on a great exploratory journey. I think it takes a tremendous amount of courage for us to do what we do. And in a way, I get sometimes terribly discouraged, and I find myself saying, as a race, what are we doing to each other and how are we acting? And yet, on the other hand, I'm so proud of us because we've had the courage to take on individuality and to even give up mostly the memory of it. And it does make it a little bit difficult when we're here, especially when we get on in age, because I think all of us start after a while to get homesick for the source. We want to go home, but we want to stay. I think of the words of the Apostle Paul in the New Testament. He said, I want to be absent from the body and present with the Lord, but for your sakes, he said, I stay. And I think that's what we're all doing. We kind of have that yearning for the source, which we have forgotten, but is still a part of our vestigial identity, who we are. Does that make any sense? Putting it that way.
It does. I think that one of the things that I wrestle with constantly is the fact that, okay, I'm here for the spirit that's within me to learn, to grow, to expand, to express.
Yeah.
I'm not here.
Yeah.
I'm not here for others. I'm here for the spirit that's within me. Yet, if my journey helps and teaches other people, that's just great. But they used to love to have me speak at church because, I often said, okay, I am ordained, but I don't feel qualified to preach to you, but I can share with you some of my mistakes, so you'll have to, so don't repeat mine. You find some of your own.
Yeah.
And usually
That's
I
wonderful.
had egg on my face by the time I was done. But somebody said, are you ever going to run out of lessons? And I said, no, I've got plenty. I can keep going for generations here, but I didn't. But the thing is, it's sort of, I run across people who say they are on a spiritual journey and they're here to heal and they're here to teach and they're here to do this and I often, if I get a chance, I'll say, but what are you doing for you? Oh no, I'm here to do this. I'm here to serve, but you're here to serve what's inside of you. And then I think, okay, so that's what they think their journey is, and who am I to tell them?
Yeah.
But
I love the way you put it. I love the way you put it. You often have egg on your face. When I was just starting out in carpentry, and I was very young, and I went on my first job with a bunch of experienced carpenters, and I was nervous because I was afraid I was going to make a mistake and mess up the whole thing. And I had an old timer take me aside and give me a lesson that I'll never forget. He says, I know you're nervous. He said, but look at those guys out there working on that house. He said, do you know who the best carpenters are? And I said, who? And he said, they're the ones that have made the most mistakes and learned from them. And I've used that all the way through my life. We do the best we can, and sure, we're going to fall down and make mistakes. But if life is growth, and if life is spiritual growth as well as material growth, of course we're going to make mistakes. But the beauty of it is to be able to share those mistakes so maybe other people can be spared from them.
Well, yeah, I'm not so sure I spared anybody from anything, but I will admit too that my mistakes I laugh at because it was like I was so pig-headed. I made the mistake so gargantuan that it would take an idiot to miss it. And there were little mistakes, and I keep telling people, if you spy these before they get to be big and take care of them and learn from them, then you've got something going on in your life. Unfortunately, I seem to like to make examples of myself, so I usually wait till I'm hip deep in a problem before I admit, well, this didn't work. How do I get out of this one?
It certainly is easy to do. That's for sure. That's for sure. But on the other hand, when we are able to laugh at ourselves and be honest with ourselves, I think it just goes farther to push that essential I, that it's the which is the essential part of all of our being. What is that I? We say I have a body, I have a heart, I have a brain, and we ask ourselves, who is the I that has all those things? We used to say the I was located in the heart, and when the heart stopped, the I stopped to be. But then we learned how to keep people alive with artificial hearts. And for a while we were saying the I is located in our brain. A lot of neuroscientists even say that today, that essentially that I is located in our brain, and it's translated through chemicals and electricity and pulses and all that kind of thing. But then we have people who what we are called brain dead, but we can still keep them alive for a long time. And I think that essential I, it just refuses definition, and that's why I'm convinced that we are spiritual beings, because when we begin to take away everything that the I has, including I have the cells of my body, we can even take those away, and we begin to peel away the layers of that onion, and eventually we're left with something that looks like pixels, basically, and then eventually those even disappear. So the essential I that is here is really a spiritual entity. Our essential identity is simply housed in this material body. I like to look at it this way. I like to talk about our material body that houses this I as a body that's encased in a fence, really. That's it's a five-sided fence, kind of like a pentagon, and that the five sides of that fence are our five senses: touch and taste and hearing and smell and sight. And those senses have evolved to protect us in some ways, because otherwise, boy, the information coming to us would just be so great, it would overwhelm us. So it has to filter out some of these. As a result, instead of seeing the entire spectrum of color, for instance, we see red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, violet. We know that colors exist above that we can't see, and below it that we can't see. So in that sense, the fence that the part of the fence that is sight is protecting us from this overwhelming information that will be coming to us. But in another sense, over the top of this fence is a roof that I like to call the intellect, and that's what explains to us what comes through the fences. And so what we have here is this fence and with the intellect over it, and everything in the fence is what we call reality. when the truth is, reality is really what is outside the fence. Classical physics exists here inside the fence, things that we can explain in that way, that has rules and laws and all. But outside the fence is this wonderful quantum Akashic field that doesn't react to classical physics. And that's the real reality. And I think that's the essence of out-of-body experience, is really learning how to get outside the fence and to experience reality as it is.
Well, now, you, before we get even there, what is the difference between an out-of-body experience and astral traveling?
Well, I think probably a lot of it is semantics. It depends on definitions. I guess generally the people who teach these things talk about two different ways of out-of-body, two different kinds of out-of-body experience. One is called etheric travel, and that's what I like to call local traffic. In other words, when we're talking about being able to see aspects of this reality, remote viewing, for instance. The military worked around this for a long time, and they even sent many representatives to the Monroe Institute up in Virginia to learn how to go remote viewing and actually see other places on the planet. What they were actually doing was trying to create a way to spy on our enemies without ever going out of the country, leaving your living room. And where are the enemy submarines, or where are his bases, and all this kind of thing. So remote viewing is actually seeing something that's going on within this reality, and that's called etheric travel. Astral travel is usually the word that they use when they start talking about going to other dimensions and seeing other realities, perhaps other universes in the multiverse. And that's where it gets very difficult. Astral travel gets very difficult. Not in doing it, that's one thing. Coming back and trying to explain it, that's the hard part, because we are seeing things and experiencing things that we try to describe with language that was invented only to describe things here in this material world. And so when we go and we see a totally different kind of entity that may exist in a totally different kind of dimension, and then we try to explain it with language that was made to be used on this side of the fence, it becomes very difficult. My wife and I lived for a long time out in the Southwest, and we saw a lot of rock art out there, and now they're even discovering more rock art here in the Southeast as well. But we see some pretty fantastic figures that look human but not quite human, or they may be part human and part animal. And I think what we're seeing there is an attempt to explain something that the shaman saw when they practiced astral travel, and then they came back and tried to show other people what it was that they saw. And so they drew these pretty fantastic pictures. I think we see this same thing in the great cave paintings in Western Europe, Lascaux and all of the rest of them. I think we make a mistake when we try to say, well, what were they trying to picture? Maybe they just didn't do it very well, but they were trying to show an animal, or they didn't do it very well, but they were trying to show a human. And I think maybe we're not giving these artists enough credit. I think they were trying to show exactly what it was they saw, but what they saw doesn't translate very well to those of us who live here.
Yeah, frame of reference is really important. But if you go way back, they used to have a tribe memory, or everyone that was in the group that was living in a particular place were able to share memories, that there was that telepathy or that memory, that they called it memory. But it really had to do with as a group, and I think it's the group energy that helped them to get there, to be honest with you too. But that they would share the memories really of the gatherings. Now, we could do that today if we didn't have so much tech stuff all over the place. I think we've dumbed ourselves down tremendously because of the technical stuff that we've got. Now, it's your book was fascinating in that you experienced your first out-of-body experience without actually planning on doing it, and then you started to seek it and had trouble getting back to where you started.
Yes, that it goes on today just as much. It is kind of maddening in a way, because when we came out here deliberately to get away from all of the high tech stuff that was just filling our lives. And so what's the first thing we did? Well, we drilled a well, and we built a septic system, but then we had to bring back power. We had to bring back fiber optic cables and everything else. So we're bringing it with us. And, we can turn it off, and we do sometimes. And then I have, that's probably when I feel closest to spirit, closest to source, and when I have the best and most successful time with out-of-body experiences. So then I have a group of these experiences, and I finally decide I want to write a book about them. And so I write a book, and of course the book takes me right back into the world where I'm talking to people about it and writing about it, and then getting involved with the technology. I mean, here you're in Connecticut, and I'm in South Carolina, and we have a go-between somewhere who's in West Virginia. Without technology, we couldn't do this, and yet it's very difficult when I do 2 or 3 long-distance conversations like this using technology. It becomes very difficult, and I have to spend sometimes days and sometimes weeks shutting everything off again just to get back to what I had when I started. So it is frustrating.
Well, I know that, out-of-body experience, I mean, your book is phenomenal. And basically, you do give step by step. But it's a journey that isn't done for fun and games because, and I do believe that your intent when you go into something like this, if it isn't genuine, you don't go there.
Absolutely.
I mean, if you're looking for information about yourself, if you're looking for information about your journey, if you're looking to understand any of this wonderful spiritual mysteries that are out there, that's a good reason to do it. But if you just want to see if you can peek in on your neighbor or see what your ex-boyfriend is doing, forget it.
Yeah, I've had people talk to me. They say, "Well, listen, if you can see all these things, why don't you just peek ahead and tell me what the stock market's going to be doing and make a lot of money or something?" It just doesn't work that way. That whole ego thing is that whole ego thing really gets in our way. We have to sidestep ego. But when we do sidestep ego and have a successful out-of-body experience, then all of a sudden the desire to do all of these, I call them worldly things or earthly things that are for the wrong reasons with the wrong intentions, it just falls apart. I think motivation is everything, and as you say, I think your intentions have to be pure.
And, they can be a little unpure, but, I mean, it just, you have to have the sincerity of come on, we're human. If we were, I mean, I will admit I can walk on water, but it needs to be frozen, and I can levitate if you scare me enough and I leave the ground. But to do that, on call when I don't have the right circumstances, no, that's going to happen.
Yeah.
But But I think
Dean Radin. Yeah, Dean Radin talks about this in his book Real Magic and in his work out at the Noetic Institute. He says, the difficulty is what they're trying to do out there is understand the science behind all of these things, the science behind psychokinesis or levitation or walking on water. And so as a result, they want to do the science band. So they have to get people to come into the laboratory and test these things under scientific conditions, except that the people who are really good at it and who can really do it absolutely refuse to go into laboratories and everything else because it totally goes against everything that they believe in, to try to use their talents and show off, saying, "Look what I can do." And
exactly.
it is tough. It really is tough.
Well, it's for a long time I did readings, and people would often come up to me and say, "Prove it." And I finally got to the point where I was comfortable enough to say, I don't do tests. I just don't.
Yeah.
But
it becomes ego gratification, and that's just wrong. It just doesn't work.
It is. I mean, there have been a number of times that I have risen to the occasion, and as I walk away, say to myself, "Well, I'll pay an extra lifetime for that one." But sometimes it feels just so good. It's probably worth another lifetime. There are where was I going to go with this? There were a number of things with when you started to build your cabin and stuff that fascinated me, because my late husband and I did a whole documentary on the secrets of the stones and the standing stones and the stone chambers here in the Northeast. And you had a boulder that you felt you had to dig to find it became a standing stone, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Outside
your house?
I had built a cabin back in the woods up in Massachusetts, and the purpose of the cabin was for a place for me to go for a retreat.
Mm-hmm.
And I just wanted to sometimes get away. There was no electricity back there, and I would go back there, and I had a month's vacation every year, and I would go back there and stay there for a month. And one time, there was a time in my life when my theology, my Christian theology, began to kind of fall apart, and I began to see all kinds of difficult things with it. And I just didn't know where I was or where I was going. I needed to be grounded. And so I went back to the cabin for 4 afternoons, and I just sat on the front deck of the cabin, and I meditated. And about the third or fourth day, I began to be conscious of these sounds that I was hearing, and I thought that it was the sound of the highway, which is about a mile 2 away. And then I realized by the fourth day that it wasn't a highway at all. What I was hearing was drums. And as soon as I realized that, I opened my eyes and I looked, and here was this stone that I had been looking at. It was about 3-4 feet tall, and it was laying on its side. And I had always noticed on the front of this stone that the top of it seemed to be smoothed off. It almost looked like a face. The best way I can describe it is the old, you and I will remember, because we're old enough to remember, weebles wobble, but they don't fall down, That's what it kind of looked like. And as I looked at that stone, somehow I just knew that stone was supposed to be standing upright. So I immediately got excited. I don't know what hit me. It was totally foreign to my experience. But I ran in. I got my shovel, and I got some picks, and I got some rope, and even a hydraulic jack, and I began to excavate around the stone. And around the base of this stone, it was built up on bedrock, on a kind of a natural pedestal. And at the base of this stone, I began to discover, I knew exactly what I was going to find before I got there. There were 3 stones placed right on the bedrock, only about a foot and a half down, that exactly matched the bottom of this stone, this rock that was supposed to, and I knew that it was supposed to be standing upright. So it was too heavy for me to move by hand, but I managed to swing some ropes around over trees and with a hydraulic jack and stand it up. And as soon as I stood it up on its head, it swung around a little bit to that place that looked like the face that had been smoothed out, to face exactly where the sun came up on the day of the solstice. And in front of that rock, on the east side of the rock, there were 7 hammerstones that had been laid out in fan shape. And I was just so excited, and I knew what had happened. I knew everybody who had owned this particular piece of property since King Philip's War back in the late 1600s, because it was all recorded in the town. And back in those days, as I did more and more research, the Native American people who lived in New England would watch the Pilgrims, and the Puritans rather, bury their dead, and they would bury their dead in cemeteries with like 4-foot stones. And I just knew what had happened. The Indians were thinking, well, we must worship the same God because we do the same thing with our dead. The Indians would put up this stone, and the person would lie there, and the Indians would do their dance around the sacred spiral to dance him up to the heavens. And of course the Westerners, the people, the white people who lived in New England, said, no, your stones are pagan. Ours are gravestones. Ours are legal. Yours are pagan. So whenever they came to one, they would knock it down. And I knew as soon as I put this stone up there that what I had discovered was a place where the Indians used to worship. But when the first white people came and were awarded this land for their service of soldiering in King Philip's War, what they would do would be to knock these things down and say, there, I got rid of a pagan idol. So they would knock it down to the glory of God. Well, I came along 300 years later, and I put it back up again to the glory of God. And I didn't think that much of it really until all the snows came in New England. Those, you're up in Connecticut, you know what those snows are like up in New England, and so the snows came, and by March, we had a kind of a warm time, a nice warm spring day in March, and so I decided to go out to the cabin. And I walked out, and the snow had melted around the base of this particular standing stone, and there, right on the base of the stone, was the feathers, not the carcass, just the feathers of a ruffed grouse. And I was so excited. I thought, well, part of my intellectual side was saying, well, a hawk killed a grouse on this particular spot of ground. But there was a part of me that just said, well, why here, and why on this particular stone of all the rest of the places where it could have happened? And where's the body? Why just the feathers? So I called up my daughter. She's kind of an expert on all things Indian. And I said, what happens if you have a grouse given to you as a totem animal? And she called me back about 10 minutes later, and she said, Dad, you won't believe this. A grouse as a totem animal means you are to attune your life to the dance of life. Well, I've been a musician all my life. I played in dance bands all my life, and I could never make myself get out on a dance floor. Even though I used to love to play dance music and watch other people dance, I couldn't do it myself. Something held me back. It was some kind of a psychological problem. And sure enough, Manitou sent me this grouse that said, get in tune with the dance of life. And I thought this was a unique experience. I thought I was the first person that ever had this happen to them. And about a year later, I was at a meeting with a kind of a mentor of mine who was an Ojibwe teaching elder who used to come out to New England, and he had been given permission to share with some of us a portion of his tribe's creation myth. And after the whole day of listening to the creation myth and listening to him, I told him this story. And he looked bored, and I said, Black Wolf, how could you be bored with this? And he said, okay, I'm sorry, it's been a long day. Okay, you found the grouse feathers, and they were on the west side of the rock. What next? And I said, wait a minute, I didn't tell you they're on the west side of the rock. How'd you know that's where they were? And he said, well, that's where I'd expect them to be. And I said, you mean this happens? And he says, why are you Christian ministers? Why Christians? He says, why are you always so amazed when your God answers prayer, but when our God answers prayer, you don't believe it? And I said, you mean I've been looking for an experience with God all my life, and I now discover that he's an Indian? And Black Wolf said, no, she's an Indian.
Ooh.
It was probably my first time when I had what I later would now recognize as shamanic experience, where spirit, source, Manitou, God, actually reached across and hit me right up alongside of the head and said, "You've got a lot to learn."
Yeah. Well, that's exciting because when you get a message like that, it's like, okay, so I've got the time to learn it then. That's very exciting. And it's sort of like you kind of you roll your sleeves up, and I truly believe for those who are seriously on a spiritual journey, it keeps them vital, it keeps them alive, it keeps them their intellect absolutely so ready for the messages that come in the most unique of ways. And I have come to believe that when we get messages that are quote unquote coincidences, which I don't believe in, that logic and reason doesn't apply. the message is what's important. And if you pay attention to the message, you're communicating with your higher consciousness, the spirit that you carry within, which is just so exciting. And sometimes
I think that's absolutely true. Absolutely true. And the story even has a sequel to prove your point, I think, of how practical these things can be and the reason for it. Years went by after I'd had this experience. And about, I don't know, I think back in 2012, maybe 7 years ago. No, I guess that's 8 years ago now, isn't it? We lose track of time here in the woods sometimes. Back in 2012, my wife and I now were living here in South Carolina, and we had built a medicine wheel down below our gazebo. And while I was there in the medicine wheel, I had this very, very powerful out-of-body experience where I saw a young woman in out-of-body dancing around our medicine wheel, or down at our medicine wheel. And I went down, and this is through an out-of-body experience, of course. I actually went down and danced with her there at the medicine wheel. And little did I know that this was kind of the sequel to this whole story, because I've never, like I say, been able to dance. I've never been able to get in tune with the dance of life. And now at the medicine wheel, I was dancing with the ancestor. And it turns out afterwards that what I was basically doing was freeing the energy, the earth energy of this ancestor, so that she could go on to the next plane. So it had a practical sense as well as just a mystical sense, or a metaphysical sense of being able to dance, getting your life in tune with the dance of life. I'm still working on it every day. I think we all do. But there are patterns, long patterns, that you can only describe as the dance of life.
Yeah, and if you're attuned to it and open to it, it spread before you. And in many cases, people dismiss it as, that's my imagination. It couldn't possibly be. But if you can, if you will, there's a wonderful story about a rock that was shaped like a hawk. That story.
Oh, yes. I'm still taken by that whole story. It turned out that this young woman who I was dancing with, it turned out through a vision that came to me. It was kind of like, and I don't want to call it a vision quest, but that's kind of what it was. That this young woman had her totem animal had been hawk. Now you remember when I first had this experience, my first thought was hawk killed a grouse on this particular spot of ground up in New England. And this young woman, of course, grouse has to do with drumming. You hear the drumming of the grouse in the spring. And this particular woman had a totem animal, which was a hawk, and she had carved out, or not carved out, but tapped out with a stone, a stone icon in the shape of a hawk, and she had hidden it there. And it would come back every year when her tribe returned to this area to get the stone that they needed. We live on an ancient stone quarry where they used to come back every year to get the stone that they needed to make their weapons for the year. And she had actually hidden it. And it was in seeking out that hawk that she died here. It turned out that there was a great flood, and she got too close to the edge and disappeared. And her family couldn't find her. And now, thousands of years later, I helped dance her back to her family. And I wouldn't have thought anything more about it. As a matter of fact, there was a part of me that just said, well, you're just making this up now, Jim. Come on, don't tell anybody about it. This woo-woo stuff, you're just making it up. But when my wife was looking for stones to make a fence, she was walking along the old shoreline of what used to be a river around here. And she reached down and she found one stone that seemed very warm to her touch, and she picked it up, and it was in the shape of a hawk. That to me was just the absolute physical proof of a metaphysical experience. And I just have no doubt, even though everything everything that I have been all my life and all of my training wants to rebel against it. I can't get over the fact that here is this hawk that I can hold in my hand that we found only after I had had this vision of this young woman who had carved this thousands of years ago. We still have it here in the house. We've tried to make arrangements before we die. We want to return it to the woods again. We found hundreds of artifacts around here, but we don't want to take them off and just scoop them up and make a big display about them. So anything we do pick up, like this hawk, will be returned to the woods when we die, so that it can carry on and fulfill its mission. But
I think I think it's such confirmation. And yes, people
really
can say, "Oh, it's a coincidence," but there are no coincidences. They happen for a reason. And I tell people, journal them down. Write them down in a journal, because the more you write them down, the more frequently they occur. I don't know why that's important to do that, but it works.
I fully agree with you. That's I really believe it is, and we forget. I go back and I read my journals now, and I'm reading stories that I had totally forgotten that would be lost if I hadn't written them down at the time. I think it's extremely, extremely important.
Oh yeah, my website is my journal, and I found an article that I have saved tons of stuff in I have all of my late husband's research material too, so I have a ton of stuff in my computer, and I came across an article, and I read it, and I thought, I wonder if Patrick wrote it, and then it was like, I wonder where I found this, because it's so beautifully written. I just love it, but not trusting my own whatever, I put it through is this just something that someone else wrote that I just picked up, and I don't want to put it up if I'm plagiarizing, and it said no, it's not out there, and I sat with it for quite a while, and I realized, I kept saying to a friend of mine, it's just so beautifully written. I really want to put it on the website, but I'm afraid that I'm plagiarizing somebody else's work. And she said to me, "You wrote that 10 years ago. I remember you reading it to
me." We had a similar experience, and it's the reason we're here right now, living where we are. When I was down in Florida thinking about starting retirement, we were looking as to where we might want to go, and I drew a circle on a map about a 6-hour car ride, because I knew if it was any farther than that, it'd be difficult to find it. And we were intrigued by the fact that it went right through South Carolina and through Georgia, because we were living down in Daytona Beach, Florida at the time. Well, when we found places that looked interesting, especially the area that we're in right now, I wrote a number of letters to real estate people and all this kind of thing, and I only got one back. One real estate agent wrote, and he said, "Yeah, come on up, I'll show you something." And I said, "Well, I don't know if I'm interested in that part of the country or not. Let's check it out." So I went online and I looked at some local newspapers, and I found 3 different newspapers that were here in town, or not in our town, but in surrounding towns, 3 different daily newspapers, and they were carrying a religion column called the ABCs of Religion, and it was a 26-week thing where they would say A is for Aaron, and B is for Baptist, and C is for Catholic, and right through the alphabet. And the one that I particularly read was U is for Unitarian. And so I said, well, this is interesting. In a local town, I'll get a flavor for the culture. And so I read the article, and I called Barb, and I said, "Barb, I got to read you this article. This is really kind of neat. This guy knows what he's talking about." And she started to laugh, and I said, "What are you laughing at?" She said, "Well, he ought to know what he's talking about. You wrote it." And I looked down at the bottom, and sure enough, the whole series was based on The Religion Book by Jim Willis, which is an alphabetical encyclopedia of religion. And if it hadn't been for that, who knows if I would have come here? But I kind of took that as a sign. That's where I'm supposed to go. So I drove up, and sure enough, here we are.
Well, I think that it's important for people often ask me, how do you know what to do, when to do it? And I say I always wait for a call. And I do believe each of us has a calling, and sometimes it actually comes on the phone, and sometimes you just know something, and you follow through with it. But you have to understand that you don't broadcast it. By the way, somebody just texted me. The name of the article is "Life is a Mosaic." It's on my website someplace.
Wonderful.
But it's so it's I think that it's so important that everybody understand that this journey is going to, sometimes we are going to be open to and ready to, on a consciousness level, explore beyond the here and the now, and sometimes not. Sometimes a lifetime is meant to be, a solid here and now. And you can't judge anybody, because I always like to think that the pansy out in my yard is more evolved than I am, because so many people, it's what's their level of evolution, where are they spiritually? Everybody's where they belong. And it's, if you're really...
And what are they... I was going to say, what are they open to as well? I look back over my life in the ministry. Ministers are often called to the bedsides of people who are dying. And I've literally held the hand of many people who have died and then come back, near-death experiences. And they come back and they tell me about the tunnel. They tell me about seeing the presence. They tell me about the life review. They tell me about the light. And when I was doing this, I'm so ashamed of myself now how often I would hear that, and I would say, they must have just, some kind of a chemical reaction or something. I didn't take it seriously. Yeah. And here are these people who were having profound experiences that I now recognize for what they were, and they were so much more open and evolved than I was. In closed-minded ways, I was just shutting all this stuff out. And here are these people who didn't maybe have my training or my number of degrees or letters after their name or something like that, and yet they were in touch with a reality that it took me 65 years, 62 years to really start to open up to it.
About 10 years ago or so, my husband and I did a series on near-death experiences, and I just put the call out for people that had near-death experiences, and we were over, and I interviewed a lot of the people, and we played their interviews on the air. But the one that just took my breath away was a girl who had tried to commit suicide a number of times, and she always came back. And she said, "You don't understand. When you leave the body and you're flying," and she said, "It's not that you're supported by love or surrounded by love or led by love." She said, "You are love." And
that's beautiful.
I stopped dead in my tracks. And the thing that was, especially with near-death experiences, we found that not 100%, but close to 100%, 97, 98% of the people who came back from a near-death experience had a different outlook and view of life, and they were really more into loving humanity, sharing with humanity, helping humanity, and serving humanity in one form or another. They didn't all, put a white robe on and go to the mountaintop and wait for the mothership, but they did. Their lives changed, and I think that out-of-body experiences, near-death experiences, are a profound experience in opening your heart and your spirit to the potential of what the universe has to share with us. So
that's beautiful.
That said, you do give a step-by-step of how to experience an out-of-body experience.
I would probably have to amend that a little bit. Rather than how to do it, it's more like this is how I did it. This worked for me. I'm sure that there's many other people who are going to have different experiences, but with me, when I began to seek out-of-body experiences for the first time after having one really by accident, and I think probably that's a good thing to emphasize too right now. A lot of people say, do you think everybody can learn to have an out-of-body experience? What I like to say is I think probably most everybody has already had out-of-body experiences.
Yeah.
A lot of them in dreaming, perhaps. Sometimes they will accidentally find that perfect balance of one-point meditation and body asleep but mind awake. And they may experience an out-of-body experience but not recognize it for what it is. So I think it's certainly something that not only all of us can do, I think it's probably something that most of us have done. And when I began, I fell into my first out-of-body experience, like I say, pretty much by accident. And when I began to seek out-of-body experiences, I was very fortunate in that I came across the work of William Buhlman, who Bill, I think, is one of the great teachers. Bill Buhlman is one of the great teachers teaching today. He does many workshops up at the Monroe Institute, found by Bob Monroe. Bob Monroe was the one who actually coined the term OBE, or out-of-body experience. And Bill used to tell us, I went up there and studied with him for a week and reading his stuff. He used to tell us, you really have to make it intentional. It has to be something you really want. And he said, if you do it for 30 days, 30 minutes a day, and make it for that time the most important thing in your life, you will have some kind of an experience. And I think he was absolutely true. I know that because for 30 days, I made it my number one priority. It was the thing that I wanted to do more than anything else. And if I had quit at day 28, I wouldn't be having this conversation with you today. And I think it's probably just because most of us are so busy and so hectic and so jumbled up in our lives that it takes that kind of concentration. I know for me, I had to make it. At first I thought I'd just try to squeeze it in whenever I had half hour here or there. But when you're just trying to squeeze something in, it isn't the most important thing in your life. So for me, I had to find a time of day when I was physically and emotionally and spiritually ready for an out-of-body experience. If I did it first thing in the morning, I was usually thinking about what I was doing that day. And if I did it last thing at night, I was usually too tired and I'd fall asleep. So for me, at least, believe it or not, the only time of the day that really worked for me was 3 o'clock in the morning. I found myself always awake at 3 o'clock in the morning. And I was rested, but I was still, fairly, the body was still pretty quiet. So I found myself waking up within a couple of minutes of 3 o'clock every morning, and I would get up, get out of bed, and go into my meditation place, and I would put on hemisync music, which is music that was developed by Bob Monroe at the Monroe Institute, which is music that was designed to, to make a long story short, kind of get the two hemispheres of your brain working in synchronization. There's all kinds of hemisync music out there now on the internet. And so I developed, over the course of time, this plan, which is just step by step. Of course, I go into detail and in the book, but basically what it comes down to is this. The first thing you have to do, especially if you want to do it safely, I know there are a lot of people who swear by using some kind of chemical or some kind of plant like ayahuasca or mushrooms or something like that. I've just never used any drugs at all, and I fully understand that there's a lot of Native American cultures and a lot of people who have used drugs, either synthetic or natural, to obtain out-of-body experiences, and I don't have any problem with it as long as it's done in a real intentional way, because I certainly don't want to criticize a lot of the Native American people and everything else who use these things, but I just don't do it myself. I wanted something that was perfectly safe and something that I could do. So number one was to simply make the decision. You want to make a decision that this is the most important thing in your life. And having said that, step number two is you've got to stick to it. It has to be consistent, and it has to be intentional. And you have to be really careful about making sure that you just really stick to your plan. And then you have to develop a system. With me, it was going to a particular place in the house, in a particular chair, using particular music, and meditating in a way that my body would be totally relaxed, but my mind would be awake. And then I had to focus. And boy, that's so important. It's when anybody who hasn't meditated before tries it for the first time, you'll be surprised how physically difficult it is. Your mind is just going to go all over the place. It's going to be chattering away. You're going to find yourself going on these long stream of consciousness things. And as long as your mind is working like that, you simply cannot focus on what you need to get your mind under control. Your mind is totally under the control of the ego. And to get out of that is very difficult. A lot of people will meditate sometimes for years before they develop the ability to have one-point focused meditation. If you can find someone who can help you with it, that'd be great. But I think you can do it yourself too, as long as you're intentional about it. And then, of course, you have to stay calm, because when this happens and you're intentionally seeking it, eventually you will succeed. I guarantee it. 30 minutes a day, 30 days, you will at some point reach that point where you will sense a shift, and you will sense yourself leaving your body. You may even see your body sitting in the chair. And when that happens, your first thought was, I did it. And as soon as you say that, you're going to be right back in your body again. You have to stay calm. Yeah. And then, of course, when you learn to stay calm and accept this, when you do come back into your senses, I really emphasize, again, keeping a journal of the whole thing. What you're looking for, basically, is a stillness of heart, a stillness of mind, a stillness of body, and then staying calm and just let it go. I don't think I've ever had two out-of-body experiences that are the same. Sometimes you will meet spiritual entities who are trying to get in touch with you as much as you're trying to get in touch with them. Sometimes you'll see things that are just totally beyond your comprehension, and you won't have any way to describe it, and that's fine. Don't describe it, just accept it and go with it. Often you'll be able to see your body actually behind, sitting there in the chair or wherever you're meditating, if you're meditating on the floor or whatever, and you'll be able to sometimes see your body. And if you can stay calm during the whole thing and just experience it and say that it's not a crazy thing happening. It's perfectly normal and perfectly natural. I think our ancestors did it all the time. We've just forgotten how. That's all.
Yeah, they
so
especially shamans.
That's the technique that I use.
Well, and I have spoken to a lot of people, and basically the one thing that is constant among everyone who is on a spiritual journey, who's seriously on a spiritual journey, has written books on it or has studied it forever, the one thing that is a constant with all of them is meditation and journaling.
Yeah.
And not that you're going to take your journal and publish a book. You can put recipes in there and phone numbers and everything else too, but it should have your experiences, what you're sensing, for some reason, and I don't know exactly why, but if you write something down, you've cemented it in reality and signaled to the spirit realm that you got it.
Yeah. Yeah, and what's so difficult about it is when you come back from an experience like that, sitting down and writing about it is the last thing you want to do.
Yeah.
You know, you're going to get excited. You don't want to sit down and just try to put it in words, because words always fall short. But I think it's the most important thing. Even though it's the last thing you want to do, it's the most important thing. So what I like to suggest to people is don't try to form great sentences. You're not writing a book. You're just, write even sometimes just plain old words or phrases or something like that. And don't worry about spelling. Don't worry about punctuation. Just try to get the words down on paper. You can pretty it up later, you know.
Well, and lots of times, there are messages there for you, which are so important. And I think I think the one thing that most people don't understand is that every day in your physical reality, the spirit within you is sending you messages. And when you get the message, it's just, I had somebody who I was talking to, and she said, it's really wild. I'm losing the sight in one of my eyes, and nobody knows why. And I said to her, well, what are you refusing to see? And we talked, and she finally came up with something that had to do with one of her sons that she was estranged to, and she said, that makes a lot of sense. I really haven't looked at it from his point of view. And the next day she called me and said, my sight's back. And so, I mean, absolutely go to doctors when you think there's something wrong. I mean, don't hold back and say, oh, this is a spiritual message. No, go to doctors when you think something's wrong, for sure. Yeah. But also look at the other side of it, because our bodies are often where spirit is writing a message on, whether it is trouble with a foot or something and we haven't taken a step forward in some place where we should, or, you hit a brick wall and literally it's, well, where am I hitting a brick wall in my life? And, why give yourself migraines? Why not just go around and do another direction until this one opens up? And so there are, you don't have to be out of body to get these messages. You just have to be aware that there's meaning behind everything that happens and occurs. Nothing is random.
Yes. Yeah.
So,
I had an experience that kind of mimics that same kind of thing. There was a time when I was just starting an out-of-body experiences, and I lost my stability. Everything that I believed in was changing, and everything that I had always put my faith in was now different. And I didn't know where I was going, and I didn't even know if it was real. I didn't know if I was making all this stuff up. And when I say I lost my stability, I literally did. I think I broke an ankle. If I didn't break it, I sure did crack some things, and I didn't go to a doctor or anything like that. But for almost a year, my ankle, I couldn't even hardly walk. I had to use a cane, and it was very, very difficult. I had to have a big brace on my ankle all the time, and all that kind of thing. And it was a time when I just like to say I lost my stability. I couldn't move forward. And at one point, when my ankle was still pretty bad, and I've had bad ankles all my life, so I think it probably had something to do with that too. But at one point, I decided one day I was going to go down to to our gazebo to meditate at our medicine wheel, and so I went out the back door because we had a dog who was with us at the time, a dearly beloved member of the family named Rocky, who always liked to be in on everything. And he was always a delight to have around, but when I was trying to meditate, sometimes he made it a little difficult. So I decided to sneak out the back door so Rocky wouldn't know I was going out. So I was out going down when I realized I had my cane, but I hadn't put my ankle brace on. And I said, oh, boy, and it's slippery out here, too. But I didn't want to go back in because I didn't want to disturb Rocky. So I went down, and I write about this experience in the book, that while I was there, I had a real vivid experience of actually transporting myself in body down to the medicine wheel below, where I was sitting up in the gazebo. And while I was down there, I met a healer who actually came and worked on my ankle, touched my ankle, massaged my ankle. And I was thinking at the time, what good is it to touch my astral ankle? My real ankle is one at Turton, and that's up in the gazebo. But sure enough, after a very vivid experience, and I won't do the whole experience now, but you have to read the book for that, I guess. But after a vivid experience, I realized that I knew where I was going again. I had some spiritual direction. So I got up and I started going up to the house, and even though the ground was slippery, I realized I was walking without my cane, and I started dancing on the way up to the house. I came back up, and eventually I was telling Barb about it, and I danced across the room, and my ankle was fine. And, I've never had a bit of trouble with that ankle since then. It's amazing to me. Talk about a practical experience.
Well, every now and then we have to be given something that, is just, beyond explanation. So it's either you believe it or you're crazy, one or the other. It is exciting though. And it's I think being on a journey the way you are. Now, are you still involved with your music, because you did play it a lot? I know you said you used meditation music, but are there other forms of music or that you utilized in your spiritual endeavors?
I listen. Yeah, I listen to a lot of music, but I don't perform anymore. I was a professional musician. Music was my first my first profession, and it takes so much to perform at that level, and yet once you've lost that level by not practicing and by not doing it all the time, it really isn't very satisfying to go back and just make music just for the fun of it. I do some singing, and sometimes when I'm doing public speaking, I'll bring my guitar along and I'll sing that kind of thing. But mostly it's just a way of kind of bridging the gap between people. I listen to a lot of music, but I haven't played for a long time.
I've found
trombone was my main.
I've found that when talking to some trombone. Yeah,
trombone was my main instrument, and I had two friends who I went to school with back in the late '60s, who went on to become two of the three trombonists of the Los Angeles Philharmonic and the Hollywood Bowl Symphony, wow. And they played together for 30. They played for 30 years out there. And when I was down in Florida and still playing a lot, and I was teaching instrumental music at the university down there too, and playing a lot and singing a lot, I got a call from them. They were coming on a tour. The three of them from the Los Angeles Philharmonic were coming on a tour and doing a series of concerts in Alabama and Georgia. And they wanted to know if I could come along and be the fourth to form a quartet with them. And, of course, playing with these guys who were pros at that level was great. I mean, I really worked hard for that. And we got together. We had a wonderful time. We had a great reunion, and we played a lot of music. I think we did 4, maybe 5 concerts in different venues around Alabama and Georgia. And when that was over, I kind of figured, well, there's nowhere to go from here. I mean, that was a great experience, and I really liked it. But I just I didn't have the want to anymore to do the work that you need to do to play at that level. And so now I haven't put I didn't put my horn together for probably 10 years now.
Well, I found that
although I did have one wonderful experience about maybe 8 or 9 years ago, when I hadn't played for about a year, but I could still get the horn out and toot a little if I wanted to. And I decided one day to go down to the medicine wheel and take my horn with me for some reason. And this time Rocky came with me, our dog. And so I went down the medicine wing. I put the trombone together, and when I was down there, I had all of a sudden no idea what to do. I didn't know what I was trying to accomplish. So I just started playing a Gershwin tune, of all things, Someone to Watch Over Me. And I started to play, and Rocky's a tough audience. He started to howl along with me. And all of a sudden, in the middle of the day, even in the middle of the afternoon, an owl started hooting at me, and then another one, until I heard 5 different owls coming from 5 different directions. And so I got a little carried away. I would take the notes that they were hooting at me, and I would play them on the trombone, and then my jazz background kicked in, and I started, riffing on them a little bit and improvising them. And we had this great chorus going, 5 owls, me on the trombone, and Rocky all howling in the middle of the afternoon. I don't know what it sounded like, but it was a lot of fun. That was the last time I played.
Well, I have found that music, if you're into it, and it doesn't happen all the time. I used to sing in the youth choir, and I loved it. It was energizing. It always gave me a high. It was magical. But at some point, the youth choir was asked to go down and sing with an adult choir in a huge church, the Riverside Church in New York City. It's like a cathedral.
Sure. Yeah, I've been there many times.
It's that big.
Yeah.
And so we went down. I was
Acoustics
in high school.
are fantastic in there, aren't they? Yeah.
Oh, geez. We went down and we walked into the church. The church was completely dark except for the chancellery. And so we walked down this huge aisle where the adult choir was, and we sang the Hallelujah chorus is what we were singing. And the story when Handel wrote it was that he didn't eat for a number of days or weeks, and when he finally finished and he came out of his room, he said, I have heard the angels sing. And so I did not know that story when we did this, but we went down, and in this huge dark cathedral, the organ started in, and everybody felt shivers, and we sang, and with our voices, with the adult choir, we filled the church, and I tell you, we levitated. When we were done and the last chords faded away, we looked around, and everybody had tears running down their faces. And we did, we had a break, we ate, we did the performance, and everybody was, saying how wonderful it was. It was full. The church was full when we did the performance. And I heard somebody say to the conductor, it was really magnificent. And he said, if you think that was good, you should have heard rehearsal. And it was the one time that I just felt so lifted and so out of body-ish, and I suspect everybody else did, though we never talked about it. Runners get into that zone where they are outside their body. They're just in an energetic field. I mean, there are lots of ways that people get to that space inside of themselves. It doesn't have to be a meditation per se, but it's a matter of blending with the universe instead of being, a piece of it. You become it, and you can do it in hundreds and millions. As many people as there are on this earth, that's how many ways there are to get to that place inside of yourself, and you do go out of body. It is a wonderful thing when it's all working together. It's fantastic. I have a YouTube channel that my daughter has put up for me, and she has a couple of things. One song that I wrote back in the 80s, I think part of that song is on that YouTube channel, singing that song, and there's another YouTube video where I'm playing the guitar and singing "It's a Wonderful World." And so those are fun, but those experiences that you've just described, those are experiences that stay with you for a whole lifetime. And what a wonderful venue down at Riverside Church. That's a fantastic place. I was in junior high. I was little, and so But, when I tell people about it, I tell them, go and look at the pictures of this church. It wasn't a church. It is a church, but it was like a cathedral.
Yeah.
It's huge.
Yeah.
But, I think everybody at some point in time in their life has had one of those experiences. And if you sit down and you try to, be open to what was it that made you feel magical around you? What was it that made you feel a part of the universe, a part of whatever? And you have one of those experiences, and it's not that you're seeking to repeat that one. You're seeking to get to a space where you can have others that enhance it or go beyond it. And whether you're looking to hit other dimensions, or whether you're looking to hit a spirit guide, or whether you're looking to just get messages from the spirit within you, and I personally think that oftentimes what we call a spirit guide is actually another aspect of our own consciousness. So that
I think we leave.
Go ahead.
Well, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, I was just. Sometimes people don't want to accept wisdom from themselves, but they'll expect it from another entity. So we create one. Yeah. I think I've really come to believe, and of course I have no way of proving this, but I really come to believe that when we come here into this material reality and we are manifested within a material body, I think we leave a part of us behind on the other side. The spirit guide that I refer to by the name Sabuko, and that's a long story about how that name came about, but the spirit guide that is with me all the time, and I just had constant interaction with Sabuko, and I've really come to believe that he is that part of me that I left on the other side when I came here. Some people might call it a guardian angel, a spirit guide, an entity. I remember a couple of years ago, I went up to New York State, and I was speaking at a meeting of the American Society of Dowsers. And matter of fact, that particular talk that I gave is on my website. People can at jimwillis.net. They can hear the whole lecture, the whole talk that I gave up there. And at one point in the talk, when I mentioned the fact that I was using dowsing rods to speak to my spirit guide, and I said, and I began to realize that here the spirit guide was me on the other side. And on the tape, you can hear the whole room gasp all at once. And these were experienced dowsers. And I think what they were finding out that, wow, that we can actually use dowsing to know that there's an anchor out there waiting to meet us and waiting to guide us and helping us through. It's a wonderful, wonderful feeling. And I think sometimes we know that in music. I like to use a lot of musical. I use musical metaphors too. For instance, everybody says, "Can I learn to douse, or can I learn to do out-of-body experiences?" I said, I think everybody can. Some people are better at it than others. We can all carry a tune, but not many of us are Mozart. And so I think there are people who are extremely gifted. But I think everybody can do it. Everybody can certainly enjoy it. That's for sure. Oh yeah, and to go back to your having an anchor on the other side, I have often said that exactly that there was a kind of like a shade of our physical body on the other side, and so that at the moment of death, the shade, the etheric body meets the physical body and blends back together, and that's where the symbol of prayer comes in. One hand being the etheric, the other hand being the physical, and the two of them merging together to create the totality of whatever the entity is. That's a beautiful picture. I love the way you that's a wonderful metaphor. I love it. I hadn't heard that before, but it makes perfect sense. Feel free to use it. Okay. No, please share. I do believe that there is so much going on today on a spiritual level that those of us who are old enough to talk about it with a certain amount of not knowledge or, well, wisdom and knowledge, at least from our own experience, but there's so much cosmic wisdom out there to it's just so you kind of you want to take off your shoes and run through it all and hope that it all seeps in, because there's just so much that would apply to us today, and I think society needs to have a more spiritual outlook on life and understand that this experience is one of the building blocks that will get us to the place where we need to be to start all over in another venue, in another way.
Yeah. That's what gives me hope, because there is so much dissension and so much hatred and so much arguing and so much division in the world today, and people worry about it and they say, what's going to happen? And I love to say, well, maybe it's always darkest before the dawn. And maybe we are at that point where we are being forced to make a decision. Which way are we going to go? And I like to think that the spiritual triumph is just waiting to overcome all of that bad stuff that's out there in the world today. And I love to think that the human race is not filled with darkness in our future, but we're standing on a precipice, and the darkness is simply the gathering storm of all that we have done in the past. And it's going to go. It's going to go away, and we're going to be left with a brand new, wonderful future. I think it could be tremendously hopeful.
Oh, I totally agree. And for those that I don't believe in an Armageddon where everything ends and we go into nothing. I believe that we're in the middle of an Armageddon of sorts, where it comes to mores and morale and all of that, and so that we are getting rid of the drudge, we're getting rid of the garbage, we're getting rid of the ick that we have carried this lifetime, and it's not easy, and quite often some of the stuff we let go of feels like it's precious until you realize that you don't need it. It's kind of like, damn, I don't even miss that. So it's kind of like I'm going to be moving, and so I have decluttered, and I'm horrified to a way at how much I have given away, and yet I don't miss anything. My life is just the same as it was before. All of that stuff cluttered my life. So
there's two things about that I think are really important. When we were talking about Armageddon, even in the Bible, when in the book of Revelation, when people are talking about Armageddon, they always think that means the end of the world. But no, the last couple of chapters of the book of Armageddon aren't about endings at all. The old is gone, and then come the wonderful words in Revelation 21, I see a new heaven and a new earth. And it's a brand new beginning, and I think that's fantastic. And in terms of what we carry around, I've been working on this in my own life lately. We all get into the habit of carrying these anxieties and worries and what's going to happen tomorrow, and we start when we're kids. What am I going to be when I grow up? What school am I going to go to? What job am I going to take? Who am I going to have a relationship with? And all of this kind of thing goes on. And we build up those worries, and I almost think sometimes that we build up a space within us that is full of all of that worry and all of that anxiety. And then we come along through out-of-body experience or through spiritual growth, and we start throwing that stuff away, like you're doing, getting ready to move. We get rid of it. The trouble is that unless we're careful, the same space is there, and we fill it up with other stuff because we're so used to having it. We're so used to carrying it around with us that it feels uncomfortable. And so when I, for instance, retired from the world, I thought, well, I don't have to worry about that stuff anymore. Oh, I got the same space within me that used to be filled with all those worldly worries, so I'm finding ways to fill them up here, physical worries, anxieties about this or that. And it's really hard, isn't it, to get rid of...
Isn't that like an onion, though? You get rid of one layer, and hey, there's another layer I can let go of, and then another layer, and sooner or later you get to the purity of what's inside, which is free space.
Yeah.
And you know,
Yeah.
and that's
a great way of putting it.
I knew somebody once who could carry all of his worldly possessions in one paper bag, and he was the happiest man I have ever met. And you know, not that I want to get
isn't that something?
You know, I've got stuff, and I like some of my stuff.
Yeah, I've done a lot of long distance biking and long distance hiking, and when you're on a bicycle, for instance, and I bicycled from the Pacific to the Atlantic, and everything I needed was in those panniers on that bicycle, and I found myself just free, and everything I needed was there, and I didn't need anything more. It was the essential life. And the same thing when I'm backpacking. Colin Fletcher used to call it his house on his back. You know, everything you had for a long journey that might last 6 months. You know, hiking the Appalachian Trail or something like that. Everything is in that pack, and you're perfectly content with it. You don't need anything more. You don't want anything more. And then as soon as the journey's over, you start getting stuff.
Yeah.
Oh, we are a funny race of people.
But you know, our habits, you know, die hard, and certainly they've been ingrained in us for a very, very long time. And that's what we do with children when they're born. You know, we don't look at, you know, what are the attributes, what are they interested in, what do they want to, you know, play with, because up to the age of about 3, that child is going to exhibit those areas where there's great talent. And if you encourage those, that child will have a very happy, rich lifetime. Maybe not the one you would have envisioned for them, but one that will be perfect for them.
Yeah.
And so many of us go through college and degrees, and we're not happy until we can break away from all of that and strike out on our own quest for what is best for us.
That's right. And when you come right down to it, even this body, we're going to have to leave that behind sometime. And then we're going to realize that we spent all of this time worrying about it and caring for it and grooming it and clothing it and all this kind of stuff. And we realize that even that's going to be left behind. I got a call one night in the middle of the night from a hospital. A nurse called me, and she said, Reverend Willis, can you get to the hospital? One of your parishioners is here, and he's not expected to make it through the night. And he's calling for you. Can you get here? So I said, of course. So I got dressed and got my car and drove down to the hospital. And I walked into the room of this man who was a very good friend as well as a parishioner. If any man had had a successful life, this was him. He was a mainstay of the church. He was a mainstay of the community. He had a doctorate, and he founded a college. He was a wonderful educator. Everybody loved him. You just think he had a superb life. And yet I knew that we were close enough that I could talk to him seriously rather than just, exchange pleasantries. So as I took his hand that night in the hospital, I said, Bradley, are you ready to cross over? You're ready to go. And he started to cry. And he said, Jim, I've done a lot in my life, and the one thing that I should have done, I never did. And I said, what's that? And he said, I never prepared for this moment of leaving this body behind. Well, we were lucky. He didn't die that night. As a matter of fact, he made it for, I think, 10 more days. And I visited him every one of those 10 days. And we talked and we shared, and I don't know if I taught him anything. I know he taught me a lot. But as we just concentrated on this, and he realized that everything he had ever done, everything he had ever owned, all of his degrees, all of his money, and even the body itself was about to be left behind. It was all just baggage. And by the time he died, I like to think that he was prepared to leave that stuff behind and realize it was all just baggage.
But he left an
hard.
amazing. But he left an amazing story because you're talking about it and people, will hear it.
Exactly.
So
yeah.
He definitely has an impact.
He's still alive in that sense. That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
No, it's
probably. As a matter of fact, I'm sure. And I wrote about his story. I can't even remember which book it was in now, but I'm sure that thousands of people are going to read that story. Probably more people are going to read his story in death than he ever talked to in life, and that's
quite possibly.
That's wonderful. Yeah, yeah.
Well, yeah. When you stop to think about it, it's everybody says you have a purpose in life, and I caution people when they say that. You may have a purpose in life, but it's most probably not the purpose you think it is. It could easily be helping an old lady up a walk, or holding the door for somebody, or sharing a precious moment with somebody by actually listening to what they're saying instead of trying to talk at them, not to them. So don't think that your purpose in life is something grandiose that you have spotlights and there are headlights on you for. It's probably something very simple, very pure, and very precious.
Yep. Mozart died thinking he was a failure. How many artists died thinking they were failures? And after they were gone, their purpose was revealed. They never understood the purpose while they were living. After they were gone, it was revealed in a way that just touched millions and millions of people. So you just never know. I guess all we can do is say, be honest with ourselves, be fully intentional, be in the moment. We don't have to understand it. We're not necessarily called to understand, although we keep trying to, and that's good. But who knows? It may be something way beyond our understanding that we never even think about, that we leave behind
probably
our purpose.
You get on the other side, you look back and you say, what was the purpose? And then you say, well, damn, I didn't think that was that big a deal,
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Maybe it was just
like,
saying the right thing to that one person at the time. Yeah.
Absolutely. I know one lady who said to me, I want to know what level I'm on. I know I'm at the highest level and I'm going to ascend to the masters. And I said, well, I tell you what, here's how you know. At the moment of death, as you cross over, look up. You're in an elevator. It'll tell you what floor you're on, and just pray it's not sub-basement.
Yeah. That's great.
And she looked at me and she said, I'm not looking. I said, good thought. We've only got a couple minutes left. Do you want to give your website out and any other stuff you're going to be doing?
Well, sure. I mentioned the trip to Turkey. If anybody's interested in going, I have a Facebook page on Facebook. It's jimwillis.author. And my website is jimwillis.net, and that lists all of my books and all of that stuff. And then I have a YouTube channel as well. That's just the Jim Willis channel, and you can access that through the Facebook page or the website as well. And other than that, I just love to share with people. The website has a place where you can write to me if you would like, an email address where you can. Again, I would love to hear your stories, and I would love to talk with you. And please feel free.
Okay. Well, I want to thank you so much because this has been such fun.
Thank you.
Just comparing
Thank you. It's been great talking with you. It's and I hope that from what we understand about the weather you guys are having up there, I hope that spring will come soon.
Well, if it does, I'm ready to sell my house. I'm way ahead of the spring market, and I'm hopeful myself. But thank you again. I so appreciate your taking the time to talk with me and to share with me and everybody that's listening. And hopefully people will read the book because it absolutely is a delightful book. And the book we talked about tonight was the Quantum Akashic Field, a guide to out-of-body experiences for astral travel. It is so much more. It is a spiritual journal and it's amazing, and you'll learn a lot from it. We got the lady coming on, so thank you, everybody, for being with us tonight. I certainly appreciate it. This will be up on YouTube tomorrow. And stay warm, stay happy, stay full of love and light and laughter, and enjoy your journeys. Good night now.